Okay, my topic is browser extensions. So, what is a browser extension? Browser extensions are modules that users can install on their browser to add functionality. Let's look at some examples. Bitwarden, Ublock, Origin, and Momentum. Bitwarden is a password manager that allows users to autofill, save, and manage their pop-ups, passwords from a pop-up. Ublock Origin is an ad and tracker blocker that removes unwanted and malicious content from websites. Momentum is a new tab page that makes the start page look better and adds functionality. The first thing you need to know before you start developing browser extensions is that they're cross-platform. You can create a single browser extension and deploy it to most web browsers, including Chromium-based browsers, Chrome, Opera, Edge, Vivaldi, Brave, etc., Firefox, and Safari. However, there are a few differences in the APIs between the different browsers. Extensions built for Chromium browsers, like Chrome, mostly work on Firefox with a few changes. Extensions built for Firefox can mostly run on Chromium-based browsers, with the polyfill, which is essentially just a JavaScript file you add to your extension, and a few changes. Browser extensions are extremely easy to build for web developers because they're built with the same technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can even use resources like JavaScript libraries, so you can make a React browser extension. Web extensions also have access to browser APIs to add functionality a normal website couldn't. So what can you do with the browser extension? You can create pop-ups like Ublock Origin does. You can use APIs to manage tabs and bookmarks like TabStash. Or you can theme, add functionality to websites like WikiWant. So a lot you can do with browser extensions. Let's look at the anatomy of a browser extension. So at the center of all browser extensions is one file, the manifest.json. It can be used to define and configure the names. So this browser extension is called pad, descriptions, icons, permissions. For example, here we need the storage and tabs permissions. When the browser extension is installed, the browser will ask for these permissions. And if we ask for permissions, we can use these APIs. And background scripts, toolbar buttons, and a lot more. Background scripts. Background scripts are run in the background when the extension loads and can be used to define reaction backend. Pop-ups. Browser actions or toolbar buttons can be defined in the manifest.json file. You can then set it to open a pop-up, which can be made with web technologies, like CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. So essentially, the pop-up is just a website. You can also make address bar buttons, which are basically just toolbar buttons. However, they're in a different place, and they can appear and disappear depending on the active website. Extension pages. Extension pages are pages made with web technologies, bundled offline with extension. They can be opened with the background script and can send messages to and from the background script. Some other browser extension APIs are also usable in the extension page. However, you can indirectly access all the browser APIs by sending messages to the background script and then using the APIs from there. Extension pages can be structured just like any other website. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you can also have JavaScript libraries and CSS libraries. You can then create the extension page from your background.js file. Let's look at some browser extension concepts. So one important thing about browser extensions is by default, they have a content security policy, which specifies the browser to run code from certain sources. This means you cannot load remote scripts like jQuery or React or any other JavaScript library directly from a CDN. It may be possible to load remote scripts by editing the content security policy, but it's not recommended as it's insecure. You can't use inline scripts either, like onClick. So if you're creating a button, you can't simply write onClick. You should instead add an event listener in your JavaScript. You can't use WebAssembly without changing the content security policy. And you can't use JavaScript functions like eval to evaluate strings into JavaScript. Content scripts. Content scripts are defined in the manifest.json and run whenever a specific page is opened. So let's say you wanted to add a certain element to every time you go to a website. So then you would create a content script, and in the match pattern, you would add that website. And then in the JavaScript file you create, you would specify to add that element to every time you went to that website. Context menu items. Browser extensions can create custom context menu items, right-click items basically, from the background script. They also need a context to define when the menu should appear. For example, let's say you were making a speech-to-text browser extension. You can make it where when the user right-clicks on a video, your extension converts the speech in the video to text. However, when the user right-clicks on text, your context menu will not appear. Browser extensions also can create desktop notifications. Also, browser extensions can communicate with native apps on the user's operating system. The native application needs to create a manifest.json file in a specified location, depending on the browser, to tell the browser where to send the message. So basically, if I have a native application, then I would need to make the native application create a JSON file inside some config folder, and then in the web browser extension, we would specify what the JSON file would be called. And then we're able to send messages and then receive messages from the application. So in order to better understand how browser extensions work, let's look at an example of browser extension. So in order to load a browser extension on Firefox, you need to head to About, Column Debugging. This is different on Chromium-based browsers like Chrome, etc. But you would go to About Debugging on Firefox, go to This Firefox, and then load a temporary add-on. Then you can select the manifest.json file of your browser extension. Now your browser extension is temporarily added to the browser for debugging. So for this example, I've created a browser extension called Pad. It's very simple. There's a lot of browser extensions that already exist that are much more complicated and much more powerful than this, but it's suitable to explain basic concepts. So the first thing we can see about this example browser extension is that it uses a toolbar button and a pop-up. Inside this pop-up, it's using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create a website-like appearance. So if we go to an article or any website, you can select the toolbar button and click New. You can add some sort of note and click Save. Now the article will be added to a list, which will be stored in the browser storage. Later on, if we close the browser and open it back up, it'll still be there. We can add much more articles to this list, and it sort of functions as a notes tool. So how does this work? As we remember from the presentation, at the center of all browser extensions is going to be the manifest.json file. Let's look at what this manifest.json file says. First thing we'll see is the manifest version 2, which means it specifies what format we're creating the manifest.json file in. We're going to put a name, pad, version 1, description, to take notes while browsing the web, an icon, 48 by 48 pixel icon, and then permissions. These are important because if we don't specify the storage and tabs permissions, we can't use the browser extensions. We can't use the browser APIs to manipulate the storage or the tabs. When the user installs their browser extension, they will be prompted with a pop-up asking whether they want to approve these permissions. We're also creating a browser action, which is the same as this toolbar button. And then we're also giving it a pop-up. If you remember, a pop-up is essentially a website that's stored offline and appears in this pop-up. In the pop-up, we have an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. When the pop-up first loads, in JavaScript, it loads a list. First thing it does is uses the storage API to get the storage from the browser. Then the storage, which is an object, a JavaScript object, it loops through the object for each key and value, and then adds these to the list. Next, it adds event listeners. If you remember from the presentation, because of the content security policy, we can't add onClick in the HTML. So instead, we're going to add event listeners. How the browser extension works is there's just two divs. One is for the notes list, and the other is to edit notes. When you click New, it'll hide the notes list and open the edit notes. When you click Save, it'll use the Tabs API, look at what tabs are active, and make sure it's on the current window of the browser extensions pop-up, and then return it to you in a list or array. And then we're going to add that value or as a key along with the description from the text box to our storage object. And then use the storage API to set the browser storage to that object. And then we're going to reload the list and show the notes list again. We also have a CSS file to make the pop-up look good. So thank you for coming to my workshop. Here's the source code for the example extension if you want to look at it further and if you need help or want to learn more. I recommend the Mozilla MDN docs, which are pretty useful for learning how to make browser extensions. So does anyone have any questions? Okay, if no one has any questions, then I'll end now then. Thank you.